Shalom Chaverim, and welcome back to our discussion of Sichos HaRan. Just to chazer a little bit, as we like to do, in the last several Sichos that we've talked about, we've learned about some important foundational Breslov concepts. And last class, we talked about the fact that, if you really wanted to sum up Breslov in three concepts, those would be simplicity, joy, and the extra importance of Rosh Hashanah. We've also talked previously about the importance of Hisbodedus, this personal prayer practice that Rabbi Nachman brought down. Today, we're going to look at a couple more sichos, b'siyata d'shmaya, and we're going to introduce through those yet another foundational concept in Breslov thinking, really just in Hasidic thinking in general, and that's attachment to the tzaddik. So without further ado, I want to jump in. We're going to start with Sikha number 22 in the BRI book that's on page 123. I'm going to read that quickly, and then I'm going to go on to Sikha 23, and just read a couple of pieces from that Sikha as well, and then we'll see what this has to do with what we've discussed previously. So beginning with Sikha number 22, Rabbi Nachman taught, "It is very good to be worthy of being close to a true tzaddik. Regarding the Messianic age, it is written, the ends of the earth will be grasped and the wicked will be shaken from it. However, one who is attracted to a true tzaddik can hold on to him and not be cast off. Holding on to the tzaddik, he can remain firm." So he's bringing down this pasuk from the book of Job, where it's talking about how in the Messianic age that there's going to be lots of unrest, and that things are going to really be sort of shaken up, literally and figuratively. And he's introducing this idea that if you're attached to a tzaddik, and we're going to talk in a minute about what that really means, then you can hold firm throughout all of that upheaval. Moving on to Sikha number 23, I'm going to skip over the first couple of paragraphs and just start in the middle here because it connects to this idea. It says, "But a person who is close to a true tzaddik can run to him and receive from him some article of spiritual clothing to put on." He's talking about how when we have needs, when we're in a situation where we might be pitied by others because we're lacking something in our life, he's saying a person who's close to a true tzaddik can run to that person, to that tzaddik, and receive from him some article of spiritual clothing to put on, something to help alleviate that lack. And then continuing, at the very end of this Sikha, Rabbi Nachman says, "Fortunate is he who is worthy of eating many chapters of Mishnah, drinking a number of Psalms, and clothing himself with some good deeds." So whatever it is that you lack, whether it's food or clothing or shelter, he's saying you can solve that by with Torah study, which is another important thing that we've studied, that we've talked about. But Torah study specifically while attached to a tzaddik. So what's a tzaddik? It literally just means a righteous person. But there's this idea in Hasidus that in every generation there are tzaddikim. There are certain righteous people who are at a very, very high level, and through whom we can increase our spiritual success. And Rabbi Nachman undoubtedly was and is one of the greatest tzaddikim in Jewish history. I want to do something a little bit unusual now. Even though this is a Sichos HaRan class, I want to take a look at something in the Likutei Maharan, the Kitzer, the abridged version of Likutei Maharan, which Reb Nassan compiled. And specifically, I want to look at Torah 9 from the first volume. It says, I'm sorry, not Torah 9, Torah 8. It says, the sighing and groaning of a Jew are very precious because they entail the completion of whatever is lacking. So here again, we're tying in this idea of if something is lacking, it can be completed through sighing and groaning, which is this idea of hisbodedus that we've talked about before. It says, in other words, when a person lacks something and he sighs over what he lacks, he thereby makes up that deficiency. And then he continues, anything that a person lacks, be it livelihood, health, or anything else, cannot be fulfilled except through attachment to the true tzaddik and rav. The reason for this is that the deficiencies are made up by sighing, since when a person sighs over what he lacks, he taps into and draws forth the divine breath of life to make up for the deficiency over which he sighs. However, this breath of life, which can supply what a person is lacking, can be received only from the tzaddik of the generation, who is completely attached to the Torah, since Torah is where the breath of life rests. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. So basically, Rabbi Nachman is saying that hisbodedus is the vehicle by which you make up for what is lacking. And specifically, that sighing over what is lacking in your life is how to cure that deficiency. However, the breath that's required for that sigh is not the ordinary breath from our physical lungs. It's actually a spiritual breath that is only obtained when you're attached to a tzaddik, when you're attached to one of these great righteous people of the generation. And this ties in nicely with the two Sichos that we just looked at, where Rabbi Nachman is saying that if you lack something in your life, you have to attach yourself to a true tzaddik, and you have to cleave to that person in order to have spiritual clothing, in order to have spiritual making up for whatever is lacking in your life. So, really interesting idea, and importantly, in Breslev, Hasidic schools in general had a progression of tzaddikim. We think of like Lubavitch, which started with the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, and then proceeded throughout generations all the way until the early 1990s, with a tzaddik sort of at the head of that particular group of Hasidim. Breslev is a bit unique in that there's only one Rebbe. There's Rebbe Nachman, and his physical life ended 210 years ago. So there was no succession of other people. But it's an important idea in Breslev thinking that Rebbe Nachman is still the tzaddik to whom we can attach. And how do we attach ourselves to Rebbe Nachman? By reading and studying what he taught, by reading and studying his Torah, which is contained in Likutei HaRan and Sichos HaRan that we're covering here, in his Aleph-based book of Midos, and all of these other sources that he left us. I mean, Rebbe Nachman left us, thanks again to the tireless efforts of Reb Nosson, to transcribe all of these teachings. Rebbe Nachman left us an immensely deep well of Torah knowledge that we can use to connect to him, to Rebbe Nachman, to attach ourselves to him, so that when there is upheaval, whether it's the upheaval of messianic times, where everything is going to be shaken up, or whether it's just a personal upheaval of lacking something that we really need, whether it's food or clothing or shelter, in any of those situations, by attaching ourselves to Rebbe Nachman, by immersing ourselves in his Torah, in his teaching, we will be able to stand firm. And we will be able to proceed with simplicity and joy because of the efforts that we've made in hisbodedus and in study of Torah to cleave and attach to the tzaddik, Rebbe Nachman. It's a complicated idea, and don't worry, we're going to come back to it. We're going to look at it from some different angles. But something for you to ponder right now is just how important it is to attach yourself to a tzaddik. And the fact that Rabbi Nachman gives us that opportunity because of this immense, wonderful well of Torah knowledge that he's left us through his scribe Reb Nosson. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.